right now. Even as we're awaiting more information about this attack that occurred on Al-Assad Air Base, I think it's clear to point out this is exactly what I've been warning against. Trump began with taking this act of war, and it's very quickly escalating. We're seeing one retaliation after another, this tit for tat, increasing, needlessly putting our men and women in uniform in harm's way. We need to get our troops out of Iraq and Syria, because the longer they are there, the more likely they are at risk, and the more likely that this escalation of retaliation will continue, digging our country deeper and deeper into this quagmire of another endless war, this time with Iran.
Congresswoman, given the strikes in Iran tonight, it looks like
in Iran or Iraq?
Sorry, in Iraq. My apologies.
Yeah.
Trump's meeting with his National Security Council. There are a lot of vacancies right now. A lot of acting positions, a lot of positions vacant. What is your response to the lack of permanent roles in the administration right now?
I think there's one person who is responsible for this, and that's President Trump. He is the commander-in-chief. So there should be no finger pointing at anyone else. He has chosen to surround himself with neocons and warmongers, people who've been wanting to go to war with Iran for a very long time, and they have exactly what they've been working towards. Ultimately, President Trump is serving as commander-in-chief, and he alone is responsible for where we are, and he alone must take the actions necessary to get our troops out of harm's way in Iraq and Syria, and to begin to de-escalate this situation to prevent our country from entering headlong into a war with Iran that would be far more devastating than anything that our country has seen in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Congresswoman, tomorrow Congress will be briefed and then they will vote on a resolution. The House will vote on a resolution of whether or not to limit the president's authority in Iran. What is your understanding at this moment of how you will vote? What possibly could the Trump administration say to convince you to not vote no on that?
I'm headed to Washington early tomorrow morning to join in and listen to this intelligence briefing that we'll receive, I think, early in the afternoon. And we're waiting to see what the language will be in Congress, but Congress must act in order to prevent Trump and his administration from continuing to escalate this war. That's the bottom line. Congress should have acted a long time ago. As I've said earlier, I worked with the Armed Services Committee to include a provision in the National Defense Authorization Act that President Trump has already signed into law that would have prevented this administration from taking military action against Iran without congressional authorization. Leaders in Congress stripped that provision out of the bill. We are where we are. Congress must act immediately and in a bipartisan way in the interest of our country and our national security interests to prevent further escalation of this war with Iran.
You are in a unique position. You are the only Iraq War veteran who is running for president currently. You also have previously deployed and you're still active duty. Can you talk to me a little bit about the human toll of the attack today in Iraq, a place where you've served? And I'm just curious. I mean, I don't think your group has been called up for active duty, but can you just talk to me a little bit about the price of war and how the personal effect on you?
Like I can tell you, walking in here tonight and starting to see the alerts of this attack at Al-Assad Air Base brought back a flood of memories from the time that I served in Iraq in 2005 during the height of the war, where in our camp and in many other camps, we received daily mortar attacks, daily rocket attacks, constantly putting our troops at risk. I just checked my phone and I've got a flood of messages from friends of mine who I deployed with, some who are still serving in the National Guard or reserves or active duty. And honestly, they're texting me saying, "What the fuck is going on?" Those of us who have served there understand very clearly the serious ramifications and the cost of what is happening here, and the fact that we do not need to be here, nor should we be as a country in the position of waging yet another wasteful, unnecessary war.
And if I could just follow up on that, you spoke with the Privé family tonight.
Yeah.
They were the last couple that approached you. I noticed it was a bit of an emotional moment. They shared part of their story with me about their son's deployment. You've met with a lot of military families. They show up to these events. What's going through your mind in that moment?
Just the incredible sacrifice that our men and women in uniform make and that their families make. And as we hear a lot of politicians speaking with toughness and bluster on television about what we have to do, the vast majority of them have no idea what it means to serve in harm's way, nor do they understand what these moms and dads and husbands and wives and children are going through as their loved one is called up and sent overseas, as they're questioning, what is this for? These are people and their families who've committed their lives to serving our country. A lot of people don't understand what that's like. When you think about what would you be willing to give your life for, your entire life, this is how special the sacrifice is and rare that our troops and their families make, which is why it is so critical that we have leaders in Congress and a commander-in-chief that understands that and that respects that and makes these decisions honoring that sacrifice and not needlessly throwing it around like it's worthless. And that's what we have today. That is exactly what's going on.
In the wake of tonight's news, what does the Commander-in-Chief owe the American public and the armed services?
Making decisions about when and where our military is sent into harm's way that serve our national security interests. You know, for me and so many other people, we volunteered to join the military, motivated by the attacks on 9/11, to go after and defeat those terrorists who attacked us on that day. Didn't hesitate to volunteer to deploy to accomplish that mission. Our men and women in uniform are not afraid of going and fighting the battles that must be fought. But those battles must be battles that actually work towards ensuring the safety and security of our country. The lives of our troops should not be squandered needlessly in fighting more wasteful regime change wars, wars that actually undermine the national security interests of our country.
And Iran is
Final
wondering
question.
if there's retaliation for the first two waves of attacks tonight, that they have a third wave prepared to destroy two other sites. How can America de-escalate this situation right now?
By exercising leadership. By exercising leadership. That's what a president and commander-in-chief is supposed to do. Not further escalate the situation by saying, well, they did this, now we've got to respond, and then they're going to respond, and we're going to respond bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then what? We find ourselves years down the line continuing this escalation of tit for tat and seeing the deaths of countless numbers of people, American lives and people in these countries who are suffering because of yet another needless, wasteful war. Exercise leadership to de-escalate tensions, to sit across the table, to begin negotiations, to be the adult in the room and actually lead in the interests of our country. Setting aside selfish interests or political interests, actually lead in the interests of our national security and the American people.
Congresswoman, can I
Final
just ask
question.
one follow-up to that? There's been a lot of talk of whether or not politicians consider this to be an assassination. But at the heart of that question is really whether or not the United States was reacting in self-defense to an imminent attack. You've studied a lot of international humanitarian law. Do you think that the United States violated international law?
I'm not an attorney or an expert in international law, so I'm not going to comment on that. What I have been focused on is this was a violation of the Constitution. The president should have come to Congress, period. That's what the Constitution mandates. And the inexperience and lack of understanding of national security and foreign policy is very clear in this president very carelessly making a decision that has thrown our entire nation into a war that never should have happened in the first place. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.